This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. I had a lot of feedback recently from people who've enjoyed the episodes featuring other gardeners and business owners who are trying to run green businesses. So I called on former guest and supporter of the podcast, Dave Woolmer. Dave changed career from law to gardening and has been forging ahead creating a business based on sound principles and horticultural excellence. Listen on to find out what he's achieved to date.
I'm the very proud director and principal horticulturist of Greenheart Horticultural Services, and we're based in Crewe in Cheshire East. But since I was last on the podcast, I've had quite a significant career change. I was previously a solicitor in private practice, specialising in high-value claimant medical negligence cases, and had worked for quite a number of firms, and essentially got to the point in my career where there was a staff meeting one day and my supervising partner actually said to a colleague, a newly qualified solicitor, who was complaining about the case management system that we used. My supervising partner said to her, well, this is a problem you're going to have for the next 35 years. And that actually made me feel physically sick, the thought of being in legal practice for another 35 years. And I think that was a bit of a first alarm call that actually I needed to start to think about what I really wanted. Did I want to double down and follow the career path of working my way up through the different levels to reach partner? Or did I actually want to look at doing something that I enjoyed more? And I think I'd always envied people that said, oh, I love my job, and they were always kind of bouncing out of bed in the morning to go to work. I'm very much a morning person, but as time had gone on in my time in legal practice, I'd started to become less interested in getting up in the morning to go to work. And so I came to the realization that really I needed to do something and stop moaning about the situation, actually take ownership of my own situation and do something to change it. So I reached out to a couple of podcasters. Well, I got very different responses from the two different podcasters. One gentleman, whose name I won't mention, was very negative about the whole idea of career changing into horticulture, and essentially suggested that he just did it as a way to hide in people's gardens and that it wasn't really a viable career. And then I got an almost polar opposite response from a lovely lady who runs a podcast. I don't know if you know of her. It's a little podcast called Roots and All.
No, I've not checked that out. I'll have to have a listen.
No, I definitely recommend it. It's worth a listen. Yes, you very kindly agreed to mentor me. I had said that actually, knowing that obviously people's time is very valuable, I'd sort of reached out and said, would you mentor me? And I'd be very happy to pay for your time. But you very, very kindly said, no, you'd be happy to give me some advice and that you wouldn't want to be paid for it, which is incredibly kind of you. And I'm incredibly grateful that you did that. And essentially we sat down and had a Zoom meeting. And I came off that feeling really quite enthused that actually I could make horticulture a viable career. So I decided that, right, okay, it will be a 5-year plan to get out of law. I'll start to reduce my days in legal practice and build a side hustle, essentially, build a business on the side. So I set up a Facebook page, agonized over the business name because I wasn't sure if the average Joe or Josephine in the street would understand what horticultural services meant versus what gardening services meant. So I ummed and ahed about what do I call the business, but ultimately felt that horticultural services was more what we were going to be doing. And so the Facebook page was set up and I started sharing posts of work I was doing in my own garden effectively into different local groups. And it very quickly took off. And the long story short, my 5-year plan to get out of law, basically, the Facebook page was started in June. By August that same year, I had left legal practice and gone full time. And we've pretty much been flat out ever since. We're now up to a team of, well, we've got 2 teams of 2 gardeners, me and my apprentice, plus a senior horticulturist and another trainee. who've very recently joined me. And I feel like we've got a really, really excellent team. I'm genuinely very enthused about the team that we've got. I'm very proud of the team that we've got. And I have a wonderful admin who does part-time hours for me, who, as it happens, previously worked for the wonderful perennial gardening charity that you probably know of and many of the listeners might have heard of. So I've been incredibly lucky, really. Obviously, it's been hard work, but I think if you find something that you're enthused about, then all the hard work and effort is really worth it. And it's incredibly rewarding to do what we do most of the time when it's not absolutely lashing it down and freezing cold.
What I liked about you when, we used to communicate before that chat, and I got the impression that you don't do very much by halves. So I felt that whatever you chose to do, you would really make a good go of it. You're very methodical and you really do things, from what I can see, belt and braces. And as predicted, I think you've gone to town with your business and you've done everything really, really well, which just shows, I suppose, the importance of planning and the importance of checking everything's in place before you make that leap. I know some people do it and, they just go for it and they say, right, okay, it's fine, I'm just going to do it. And to help with the consequences, let's just make this work. But your approach has really paid off in a very short time. You always obviously were a very keen and talented gardener. How did you go about increasing your knowledge around horticulture in order to start the business? Because I know for some people who go into it as a career changer, you can suffer from imposter syndrome. You can in any business. But how did you get to the point where you felt confident in going to people's gardens and saying, right, this is what I advise we do here?
I think imposter syndrome is something that always follows you around. Interestingly, I once saw a comedian that said, do you know who doesn't suffer with imposter syndrome? Imposters. So the fact that you're suffering with imposter syndrome probably means that you actually care about what you do and you want to do it right. So I think from that perspective, it's probably a good thing, because obviously what I never wanted to do was to kind of go and hold myself out as being the oracle, knowing everything about everything, because I don't think that anybody ever can know everything about everything. I think it's always a learning experience, and I'm very keen to continually educate myself on new practices and on how to do things better, and the same with my team as well. When I came to horticulture from the sort of the amateur, in inverted commas, perspective, basically when I bought my first house, I was mid-20s and bought a property that was an ex-local authority property that had a long, thin garden, and it had got a mature apple tree, a mature cherry tree, and a mature damson tree. And so they needed renovation, and so I kind of learned how to prune them properly. And then I started to learn a bit more about the plants that would suit the garden, and started to create borders and started to do some planting and understand things from that perspective, and became a bit of a Latin plant geek, not from a arrogant sense, but just because I always say to my staff, it's beneficial to know the botanical Latin, because there's only one botanical Latin name for any single plant. Obviously, taxonomists and their tinkering aside, there's only ever one name. So I kind of got into that sort of thing, and then I found that oddly that seemed to just resonate with me more than legal case names and precedent. And I kind of got heavily into the propagation side of things. I had a small, I think it's a 4.5 foot square greenhouse, polycarb greenhouse, for a birthday one year, and started to propagate lots of plants. I ended up growing a lot of bedding plants and tender annuals for my wedding, and did lots of displays in wine crate boxes for centerpieces for my wedding day, which was lovely. Sadly, most of those plants got taken home by the wedding guests because they liked them so much, but that was good fun and hard work for a few months running up to that. The more I did, the more I wanted to learn. And the more I learned, the more I was kind of enthused about the whole how plants work, the soil science side of things. There's just so much that's infinitely fascinating, how things work together and how plants work together. And it just became a bit of almost an obsession. I think you were right when you said I don't really do things by halves. I'm one of those people that I either want to be able to do something to a professional standard, or I don't want to do it at all, which can be a blessing and a curse because it pushes me to work incredibly hard to do things well. But it also means that I get very frustrated if I can't do something brilliantly straight away, which is not really how things work in life.
No, I do get that. I sometimes try something and think, oh, well, no, I've not mastered that in half an hour, so I'm moving on. So you mentioned as well recruitment, and you have expanded your business in terms of staff members very quickly, and that's to be admired, I think. I think that's a very tough process for a lot of people. I think you've also introduced an apprenticeship scheme. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so the apprentice came from basically having a lovely lad, Callum, on work experience with me. So back in probably early spring, I would think 2023, I noticed a post in a local Facebook group from what turned out to be a local organisation called Safe Opportunities. And they're a really brilliant organisation. What they do is provide work experience opportunities for students who are either disabled, disadvantaged. They work with lots of neurodiverse students, basically as a go-between between local schools and also local employers. So they were sort of reaching out to try and find, I think at that point, builders, but I actually commented and said, if you're looking for anybody to place with a gardener, then I'd be quite interested in having someone on work experience. And I spoke to them and we had everything lined up for one particular student to join me. And then at the last minute, I was told actually that student's not engaging with school. So we've decided that it's not the right time for him to have a placement, which was a bit disappointing because the insurance cost of employers' liability insurance, as anybody will know that has a business or has ever needed employers' liability insurance, it was significantly more expensive to add employers' liability insurance, which is required when you have somebody working with you, than just my own public liability insurance. So that was quite a significant cost. And it sort of initially fell a bit flat. And then a few months later, I was contacted again by Safe Opportunities, and they told me of a lad that they thought would be good for a placement. And I went along to their offices and met Callum. And he, in a half an hour meeting with him, he maybe said 2 or 3 words to me. And I thought, well, I'll give him a go. I don't know his background. And there was very little information that was passed over because Safe Opportunities don't see individuals' education, healthcare plan, EHCP. They just know enough to be able to place someone. So Callum started with me and did really well on his first day. And so he was doing a full day a week with me initially, very quickly went up to 3 days a week. And after a few months, it was quite obvious that I needed to have somebody with me full time. I was bad for taking on jobs that really needed 2 people and then just working myself half to death to get the job done for the client. So it was obvious I needed to take someone on. And my wife said, well, you'll struggle to find somebody that will work as hard as Callum, so why not offer him an apprenticeship? And I thought that was actually probably a brilliant idea because he was very keen to learn as more of a hands-on learner and was doing very, very well on his placement. So I basically had a meeting with him and his parents and Safe Opportunities and said, right, I want to offer him an apprenticeship as soon as he finishes school. So he's actually just started his paid employment with me in the last couple of weeks and is now about to start his apprenticeship at Rees Heath College, which is our local land-based college. And it's quite exciting to see that he's basically worked from a point where he was completely disengaged with school because of his neurodiversity. He's worked to a point where he will speak to clients that we go to regularly. He will pull my leg about leaving tools behind because I'm terrible for leaving tools at jobs. And he's doing a really good job. Obviously, now he's got to take that step up into paid employment, which is a bit different. But I've no doubt that continuing to guide him in the right direction, he'll be able to do that.
That's brilliant. And I noticed on your email signature, you have something that says disability confident, which is not something I'd come across before. How does that work?
So that's something that I was asked to join a meeting that Safe Opportunities were hosting. They have, I think, quarterly meetings called their Vulnerable Learners Meeting. I was asked to join that and just talk a little bit about my work with Callum and how that had gone. And the lady that is the head of the British Association for Supported Employment, whose name I can't immediately remember, so apologies to her, but she's a brilliant lady and very, very knowledgeable. She asked me whether I had signed up to the Disability Confident Employers Scheme, which I didn't know about at the time, but it's basically, there's stages to it. So I'm at the first stage with my company at the moment, which basically says we will give people opportunities and obviously make reasonable adjustments as you're legally required to, but we'll be open to giving people who are disabled or have any particular challenge an opportunity to prove themselves. And then there's steps up from there where you can work towards becoming a disability confident leader, which is basically having policies and procedures in place that actively support people who are disabled or have other health difficulties or learning difficulties to actually be able to work in the workforce and make a positive contribution. Because my view was always very much that everybody has something to bring to the table if you give people a chance, rather than sticking a label on somebody and saying, oh, well, you're autistic, so you're never going to be able to work. Well, give people a chance to prove what they can do. No one person can do everything, but everybody has their own skill set. Everybody has something to bring. As soon as I discovered the Disability Confidence Scheme, I thought, well, that's something I must sign up for straight away. It's completely free. And I would absolutely encourage anybody who has a company in the UK to have a look at that. Completely free to sign up. You just basically need to fill in a form and say that you're going to give people opportunities.
Changing tack slightly, again, I know that you're very keen to garden in a way that's sympathetic to nature and encourages wildlife. And also, I think sustainability is a big thing for you in business as well. How have you dealt with that? Have you got any good advice for people listening who might want to make their business more sustainable and might want to make their practices more sustainable?
I think for me, because sustainability was always an interest before I started the business, and sort of gardening in a sustainable way was something that was in my mind, it had to be that we brought in sustainable practices. There's some very easy decisions to make. If you're setting up in business, then if you're buying tools for your business, then there's lots of good battery tool manufacturers. Yes, they're expensive, but obviously if you buy quality, then it lasts. My view was basically making the decisions for the business, setting everything up in a way that was doing things sustainably. So any plants that we source, as much as possible, we try and source peat free. So I have a good working relationship with a couple of nurseries that grow things peat free, one that grows pesticide free as well. Basically questioning everything that we do. The vans that we've got two little Nissan ENV 200 electric vans. We use, as I say, in the battery tools, and we don't do kind of spraying, the sort of typical anything that dares to live in your garden gets sprayed to death or poisoned with something. And a lot of it's about educating clients, really. It's about explaining, actually, those aphids that you're seeing, just ignore them for a little while, and the next thing you'll see is a swarm of ladybirds, and actually they will deal with it for you. You don't need to be going out and killing everything that might be on your plants, especially if it's not going to do it any harm. So I suppose my advice really is be prepared to walk away from jobs where people are absolutely adamant on you doing things that don't sit with your ethics. I know it's very difficult to do that, especially when you first start out in business. And yes, I was absolutely guilty of taking on any and every job because I had to make the business work. It had to pay the mortgage. But as time's gone on, I've realized that actually there's certain jobs that we don't want to be doing because it doesn't sit with our ethos. And if it doesn't sit with our ethos, we shouldn't do it because we won't do it well. If it's something that sits well with us, then we'll do a much better job. And generally speaking, clients that share your own ethos will find you. And I suppose we sort of take the hard decisions in terms of sourcing things in a sustainable way, sustainable tools like the battery tools. I've invested heavily in that so that clients can then make an easy decision of, actually, I want to be more sustainable. Well, I'll just use Green Heart versus this other company that will come in and use petrol everything, cut everything to the ground and decimate it with pesticides and herbicides. So I think it's all about thinking about what your ethos is and actually being bold enough to stick to it, because there is a great demand for things done in the right way, and you don't have to be preachy about it. I always say to clients, we're not the head gardener, you're the head gardener. My job is to come in and, yes, maybe give you advice and say, actually, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about this plant there? But if they say, absolutely no, that's not what I want, then assuming it's possible and appropriate to do what they want, then we'll do it their way. As long as we've given them the right advice, our job's not to come and take over.
It's really impressive that you're sticking to your principles and communicating that well to clients so that you're getting the right people. And that's really to be commended, absolutely. So the other thing I was going to ask you, sometimes the longer way round can cost more money. Being sustainable, let's face it, sometimes can be more money. It's probably more expensive to buy an electric van than it is to buy something that's 15 years old and is chugging along on diesel. In terms of running a business profitably, I don't imagine you're the sort of person who keeps absorbing costs and chucking good money after bad. So for anyone listening, I think they could take heart from the fact that clearly you are managing to do this in a way that's revenue generating and that's profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it is a business. It's a for-profit business. I do have a community interest company, a little plant nursery. That's maybe something to chat about at a later date. But the horticultural services business is very much a for-profit business. So ultimately, if the business doesn't make money, then I can't pay people's wages, and we all end up without a job. So it all has to make money, and we have to charge fairly, but have to charge in a way that's fairly to us as well as to the clients. And we have to be sort of mindful as to how we do things and the costs that we incur. But I think sometimes people almost think of making profit as being like a dirty word, and it's not, because the more money that the business makes, the more I can pay my staff, the more I can pay myself, of course, and the more we can do. As the business grows, we can get to more people, and then they'll have their gardens cared for in a more environmentally conscious way. But it is absolutely possible to run a business in a way that, yes, makes profit, but also doesn't do it in such a way that decimates the environment. I said when I first started the business that gardening shouldn't cost the earth. Why would you want a garden that's, yes, looks beautiful, but you're using so many resources to keep it like that it's absolutely, just outsourcing the damage elsewhere, out of sight. It is possible as long as you're sensible. I mean, the electric vans, actually, they're fairly reasonably priced, and people can ultimately finance vans and things. It's just about making sure that you're sort of expanding in a sensible way. You're putting money away to reinvest into the business, and that you're researching and making sensible decisions, not rushing into things, but equally not being paralyzed by spending forever deciding one way or another. The business does have to move forward, but no, I think everybody listening should take heart that you can absolutely run a profitable business in a way that doesn't decimate the environment. Interestingly, I did look into joining the B Corp movement, but I found that actually, unless you are turning over quite a significant sum, for businesses that turn over less than, I don't know if it was 100,000 or 150,000, the annual cost was something like £5,000, which was absolutely extortionate in my view. And I think thousands of pounds just to put a logo essentially on your website and your email signature to say we're doing things environmentally consciously is a disincentive, really. So I really do think that the B Corp people need to wake up and look at the smaller businesses, because I think the statistic is 95% of the businesses in the UK are small businesses. But it's absolutely possible to still run the business profitably and sustainably. And I also think part of the sustainability comes from how you look after your staff. Interestingly, when I recently recruited the 2 new gardeners that have joined, we all have the title horticulturist because We're not mow and go gardeners, as I would call them. At the same time, I was recruiting. Another large local company were recruiting. They were offering to pay somebody with 2 years experience. Their pay offer was literally minimum wage, which absolutely infuriates me. Whereas my senior horticulturist is paid significantly above that. In fact, my trainee is paid above that, and my apprentice is paid above the minimum apprenticeship wage, because I want people to actually bring their A game to work, to care about what they do, and to do the job well for their customers. Ultimately, if we do the job well, then it speaks for itself. And we have a number of loyal clients now, which takes time to build up. But if you do the job well and care about what you do, then largely the rest looks after itself. I don't think it's an oversimplification to say that.
Thank you very much to Dave for all the good work he does, and for chatting to me for this episode. Thanks to you as well for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out episode 297, Soil and Soul with Ella Malt, and episode 224, Making Gardening Accessible with Mark Lane. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.